So far in today's Mastering Xert lesson, we've spent a lot of time talking about how Xert analyzes your current level of fitness, the concepts that Xert uses to help you improve, but we haven't had a practical section. And the whole point of these videos was to have a practical guide to help you understand how to use Xert to improve. So in the last section of today's video, I'll be discussing the Xert Adaptive Training Advisor, or XATA. I'll start by explaining some of the differences between your traditional training plan and what we call a training program with Xert. Secondly, I'll explain the training pacer gauge, how it works with surpluses and deficits, and we'll wrap up today's video with some demonstrations specifically within the Xert software. I'll show you how you can take some ownership over your training with the Adaptive Training Advisor, and I'll also show you how you can use the fitness planner. I'll start off by explaining some of the differences between your traditional training plan and adaptive training with Xert. As many of you are likely aware, or many of you have used traditional training plans, these are programs that are typically put together by coaches, and they're very structured. And these training plans will have all of the workouts that you're going to follow for the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. And so you can see essentially, this is the workout I'm going to do this week on Tuesday. I'm going to do this workout next week on Saturday. It's very structured, and many athletes like that structure. They like being able to see what's coming up. But what I want you to understand is there's also some inherent limitations to a training plan. For example, many of you might have a work schedule or a social or family schedule that can't be flexed around a training plan. Or the training plan doesn't allow for flexibility around your work schedule or family life. And so there's one example of a limitation. Another common example with training plans is what happens when you get sick and you miss a week of training. Do you need to repeat that week of training? Do you carry on with the training plan as you were? How do you do that? So you can see that there are some limitations that come about with a training plan. And we've attempted to address some of these issues with the training program that we offer through Xert. Now, the key difference between a training plan and a training program is that in Xert, you're not going to see weeks and weeks of workouts scheduled in advance for you. Instead, with the training program, your training is going to be guided on a day-to-day basis by a set of principles. Well, what are those principles, you might be asking? These are things that we've already talked about today. We've talked about your improvement rate. We've talked about your training status. We've talked about program phases. Your athlete type is important in there. So all of those factors Xert is considering, and it uses all of those to help recommend workouts for you every day. So the main difference between these two, once again, is instead of having all of your workouts planned weeks and weeks in advance before your event, Xert is going to recommend things on a daily basis based on what your training has looked like over the past 7 days, what your improvement rate is, for example. And so what you'll find as you begin to use Xert more and more is that you'll have much more flexibility over your training. Before I jump into the final couple of demonstrations in today's video, I first of all wanted to explain perhaps one of my favorite or most useful features of the Xert platform, and that is the training pacer. The training pacer in Xert helps you visualize your actual versus your targeted improvement rate in Xert. I have an example of the training pacer on the right here, and I'm going to use a laser pointer to help point out the different features that are available in the training pacer, as well as kind of explain how it works. You'll notice first of all that the training pacer has a needle here, and the needle is surrounded by 2 rows of semicircles. Now, the needle itself is referring to how your training has progressed over the last 7 days. and this is relative to your improvement rate. If you were to perfectly match your improvement rate over the last 7 days, your training pacer needle will point perfectly up and down at the 12 o'clock position, and you'll have a 0 XSS surplus or deficit. You're right on track. However, if you were to do more training than is required for your improvement rate, then the needle is going to shift to the right-hand side. So if you're doing a longer ride or a harder ride than what you need to maintain your improvement rate, this needle is going to point somewhere to the right-hand side of 12 o'clock. And on the other hand, if you were to fall behind in your training, what you'll notice is that this black needle is going to start pointing to the left, and you'll have an XSS deficit. What I want you to understand is that the goal of the training pacer is not to have a 0 XSS deficit at the end of every day. You do not need a 0 XSS deficit. Instead, you can use the inner of these two circles to help you understand where your training needs to be as you progress through your training program or as you use continuous improvement. On the left-hand side, you'll notice this red shaded region. If the needle is pointing in the red shaded region, Xert is essentially telling you that you've fallen quite a ways behind your selected improvement rate. And so you'll either need to catch up by perhaps doing a longer or a harder workout, or if you're consistently in this red region, that is Xert telling you that you need to reduce your improvement rate. You're not able to actually keep up with the improvement rate that you've selected. On the other hand, all the way to the right-hand side, you'll notice a teal region here. If the needle is pointing into that teal region, Xert is telling you that you're very far ahead of your selected improvement rate. And so if the needle is pointed somewhere in this teal region, Xert will say you can either take time off, enjoy a rest day or two, or you can increase your improvement rate. You're so far over your currently selected improvement rate that you could perhaps select a more aggressive improvement rate. Now, the gray band in the middle is essentially the optimal zone. As I mentioned before, you'll notice that the needle doesn't have to be perfectly at 12 o'clock, but you can actually have some XSS deficit or some XSS surplus and still be in this optimal zone. On the outer half, you'll notice just two colors here. This gray band here indicates that as a general rule of thumb, if the needle is pointed somewhere in this gray region, Xert would say that training is recommended. And if the needle is pointing somewhere in this teal zone, Xert would say that training is optional. At this point, if the needle is pointed somewhere over here, you're actually a little bit ahead of your improvement rate, and so you don't have to train if you don't want to. The last thing that I'll point out is the little colored triangle on the inner bar. That triangle displays your training status as well as your surplus or deficit 24 hours from now. So essentially your status 24 hours from now based on any planned workouts that you have as well. So in this example, you can see that perhaps this athlete has already ridden today, and so they've got a slight XSS surplus, and they can see that tomorrow their training status will be yellow, and they'll still have a slight XSS surplus. So this triangle can be used to give you a general idea of what your day will look like tomorrow based on the training that you do today. One note that I wanted to point out is our use of the term deficit. Now, typically deficit has a negative connotation, or it's considered a bad thing. But what I want you to understand is that having an XSS deficit in Xert is very normal. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And the whole reason that we have deficits is because you have an improvement rate to meet. So Xert is saying if you want to get more fit and you have your improvement rate, then you need to follow that and you need to train. Now, how big that XSS deficit is will depend mainly on your selected improvement rate, as well as how your training has looked over the past 7 days, and whether you're ahead or behind of that improvement rate. I'll actually give you a live demonstration to show you how the needle works and how it's influenced by the activities that you do. The last comment that I wanted to make on the training pacer is that you'll notice that the training pacer and the Adaptive Training Advisor workout recommendations are based on what we call an as of time. By default, the as of time is at the very end of the day, 11:59 p.m. So that means that Xert will show you what your surplus or deficit is at the very end of the day. If you would prefer to see it in the morning, we recommend changing the as of time to sometime very early in the morning. And that will give you an idea of how your surplus or deficit is at the start of the day. And those are really the two recommended settings for that. I'll show you how you can change that, as well as how the training pacer works and how it's affected by some of your settings in Xert. So what we're going to do now is we'll hop into the software and I'll give a little demonstration on the training planner, or sorry, on the training pacer. In this demonstration, I want to show you how the training pacer is influenced both by your selected improvement rate as well as the activity that you've done over the last 7 days. To start off with, we'll take a look at our example athlete here, who is a 2-star athlete. And we'll find their training pacer underneath the Training tab and the Adaptive Training Advisor section. Without seeing this user's recent activities, I can tell you that they've done a pretty good job of sticking to their improvement rate because the training pacer needle is near the 12 o'clock position. And they have a small but manageable 55 XSS deficit for the day. To show you the role that improvement rate plays in calculating the training deficit and the training pacer, the needle's position, we're going to change this user's improvement rate and see what happens. If I open the Goals tab, you'll see that this athlete is on a continuous program type with a moderate to improvement rate. If I reduce their improvement rate from moderate to, so if I make their improvement rate easier and select a slow improvement rate, I'll update things and Xert is going to recalculate this upper section. And you'll see that now, with the same activities over the last 7 days, but now relative to a slow improvement rate, this user actually has a 55 XSS surplus now. And so training is optional. They may not, with this selected improvement rate, they can consider taking today off. And this blue needle would indicate where they'll be tomorrow, or excuse me, the blue triangle will show where they are tomorrow. Now, to show you the other extreme, if we increase their improvement rate from slow all the way up to extreme 2, and then we update the advice, Xert is once again going to recalculate things over here, and you'll see that now this athlete is shown as being falling behind their training and having a very large XSS deficit. That's because their training over the last 7 days has been following that moderate 2 improvement rate, which is much less than this extreme 2. So hopefully you get an idea for how changing your improvement rate will influence your training deficit. I'm going to change this back now to our moderate 2 for now. And the second thing that I want to demonstrate is how your activities over the past week influence this XSS deficit or surplus. Now, as we open up the fitness planner, you'll see your past couple of weeks of activities, as well as your projected training status moving forward for a couple of weeks. And this is based on any planned workouts that you might have. To show you how the surplus is dependent on your last week of activity, I want to show you the surplus and deficit for this Tuesday. Now, the surplus or deficit for this day, which I'm pointing at here, is going to be based on the XSS accumulated from the week previous up to this day. And it's going to look at that XSS accumulated against your selected improvement rate. And right now, because no activity has been entered for either of these days, it will say that before you do a workout on Tuesday, the XSS deficit is 173 XSS. Now, if we look at Wednesday's surplus or deficit, This surplus or deficit will be based on the previous Wednesday all the way up until the current Wednesday. How much XSS was accumulated, once again, relative to the improvement rate. And because no activities are scheduled for these 3 dates, what we'll see now is that the deficit becomes even larger. Now you can see this athlete has a 249 XSS deficit. And if your deficit becomes too large, you'll actually receive a little warning from Xert indicating that you've fallen behind your training plan and that you may want to consider reducing your improvement rate. So you can see that as activities aren't completed, the deficit becomes larger and larger. However, what I want to show you now is if we plan some workouts, so if we automatically select one of the recommended workouts for that Monday, and then we look at the XSS deficit for Tuesday, it's less than what it was before. Previously, it was 173. And if we also select and do a workout on Tuesday, let's say this 90-minute workout here, now we have 2 planned workouts for this week already. And when we go to Wednesday, the deficit is not nearly as large as what it was previously. So hopefully you can start to understand that your deficit or surplus is based, first of all, on your selected improvement rate, but also on the activities that you've accomplished over the last 7 days. In the next demonstration, I'm going to show you some more tips and tricks on how to use the fitness planner. In this last demonstration for today's Mastering Xert video, I want to spend some more time in the fitness planner, show you some of the features that are available, as well as how you can use filters to take more control over your training with Xert. As we scroll down here and look at the fitness planner, I mentioned earlier that the fitness planner is going to show the last couple of weeks of your training as well as the next couple of weeks training status. As I mentioned in the presentation earlier, the big difference that you'll notice between Xert and perhaps other training platforms is you won't see any planned workouts in the coming days or weeks. Instead, Xert prefers to guide you day by day, or as we'll see in this example here, perhaps about a week at a time. And I want to show you some of the features that are available that can help you plan your training. The first of those is the automatically create workout or automatically schedule workout button. And you'll find it as a little speedometer icon on today's date, whatever that is for you, and every date going into the future. So as I click this speedometer icon, Xert is going to randomly select one of the top 4 workouts and place it into the fitness planner for me. In this case here, you can see that Xert selected the hardness test level 2 and placed it into my planner for me. And based on doing that workout, Xert is saying that now my training status is updated on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to be yellow based on doing that workout. Now, another feature that's available are your favorited workouts and activities. So as you find workouts that you like and you click the star button by them, or as you do an activity and star it as one of your favorites, they'll show up in a list on the left-hand side. Here are the favorited workouts and favorited activities. If you want to schedule one of those, you can simply click on it and drag. Let's say I want to do the Walk This Way workout on Wednesday. If I click and drag that into my planner and let go of it, that workout is now planned for Wednesday. And I can do the same with activities. Let's say I want to do this gravel, roughly hour-long gravel ride, and I want to do it on Friday. I can click and drag it into the planner to update the fitness planner. Now, as I start to fill in the holes in my training week, so let's say I want to also train on Tuesday, you can actually click on that day, and as we saw earlier with the XSS surplus or deficit, Xert's going to tell you what the deficit is, what your training status is that day, as well as show you recommended workouts. What I want to show you now is how you can take some further control over the recommended workouts. And let's say that on this Tuesday, let's say that this athlete has more time to train than usual, so they usually do an hour and a half on Tuesdays. But let's say now they want to spend some more time training. So they click on the filter button here, and they're going to filter by duration for, let's say, 2 hours to 3 hours. So they want to pick a workout that's much longer because they have the time available. So after applying the filters, Xert now shows the top recommended workouts that are between 2 hours and 3 hours long. And now you can take a look through them and select one of them. So we'll just pick this 2-hour one on that Tuesday. The same thing works for difficulty level as well. So if we look at Thursday, I can filter by duration. I can filter by focus type, which focus workouts I want to do. I can also filter by the difficulty rating. So if I want to pick workouts that are a little bit easier or a little bit harder, I can also apply the different difficulty rating filters. And I can also filter by workouts that are in the standard Xert library, workouts that are in your coach's library if you have a coach on Xert, or workouts that are in your personal library. And clicking the reset button here will reset all of those filters. So hopefully this shows how you can take a little more control over your training, either picking harder or easier workouts, or by picking longer or shorter workouts based on how you're feeling that day, based on how much time you have to train. And so that's really one way that you can start to take more control over your training. And what we saw in the fitness planner here is that you can begin to more easily plan out, say, about a week of training in the fitness planner. You can easily see what your training status is going to be based on the scheduled workouts, or what happens if you change the days of your workouts. And so really what I hope this section does is give you the tools to start playing with the fitness planner and really using those tools that are available to you. In general, I wouldn't recommend scheduling more than about 1 week of activity at a time, just for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier with the training plan. You really don't know how your week is actually going to pan out. So at most, I would recommend only scheduling about 1 week's worth of activities. So hopefully this helps you out understand how the training planner can be used, how you can click and drag workouts, how you can use the filters to filter the recommended workouts for you, etc. That's going to be it for our demonstrations here. Let's head back to the presentation and we're going to wrap up today's lesson. Before we conclude today's lesson, I wanted to quickly recap on the main topics that we discussed in today's Mastering Xert lesson. In the first section of today's video, we spent some time talking about how Xert quantifies your training, and that this is important because if we want to help you improve, then it's important that we have a good understanding of where your training is right now. In the second section of the video, we talked about how Xert uses progressive overload, periodization, and polarization to help you improve. And in the last section, I talked about training with the Xert Adaptive Training Advisor, how Xert uses adaptive training on a day-to-day schedule versus months and weeks of pre-planned workouts. We also saw how the training pacer works, as well as the fitness planner. That's going to be everything for this lesson, for this Mastering Xert lesson. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I really hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you learned something, and we'll see you for the next video.